I discovered the secret relationship between my mom and Darren Walker's father by accident when I was 24. For 7 years, while I endured daily torment from Darren throughout high school, my own mother was secretly dating his father. She deliberately kept me in the dark, claiming her frequent work trips were mandatory conferences. All those nights I came home with bruises or ruined clothes, she comforted me without ever mentioning she was intimately connected to my tormentor's family. When I finally confronted her last month, she actually said, "It was never the right time to tell you. Well, now, it is the right time for me to finally stand up for myself." Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever felt betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you. To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, you need to know what my life was like growing up. My father died when I was 8 years old, leaving just my mom and me in our small Oregon town. Those early years after his death were difficult but close. My mom worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, which often meant long hours and occasional overnight trips to neighboring cities. Despite her demanding schedule, she prioritized our relationship, helping with homework, attending my soccer games when possible, and maintaining our Friday movie night tradition. By most measures, we had a healthy parent-child relationship. I trusted her completely and believed we shared everything important with each other. When I experienced difficulties, she was the first person I turned to for advice and comfort. She always emphasized honesty, telling me repeatedly that secrets create distance between people who love each other. This mantra made her eventual deception all the more painful. Everything changed when I entered Riverdale High School at 14. Within the first week, I became the target of Darren Walker, a junior with a reputation for singling out vulnerable underclassmen. Darren was physically imposing, socially powerful, and seemingly untouchable due to his father's position as the hospital's chief of surgery. Teachers and administrators either overlooked or minimized his behavior, unwilling to challenge the son of such an influential community figure. His campaign against me began subtly. Small comments about my clothes or hair escalated to accidentally knocking books from my hands in hallways. By sophomore year, the bullying had intensified to daily incidents: physical intimidation, lunch money theft, and public humiliation. One particularly brutal episode involved Darren destroying my science fair project the night before, judging after finding me working late in the lab. Months of research and preparation rendered useless in minutes, with a teacher who witnessed the aftermath suggesting I should have been more careful with my materials. Throughout these years, my mother was my primary support system. I would return home with torn clothing, missing possessions, or the quiet resignation that comes from sustained psychological torment. She would listen sympathetically, offer comfort, and occasionally contact school officials, though these interventions proved ineffective against the Walker family's influence. Never once during these conversations did she mention knowing Gerald Walker, Darren's father, beyond professional recognition as a prominent doctor in the community, where she sometimes conducted business. The bullying shaped my high school experience in profound ways. I abandoned previously enjoyed activities like debate club and soccer to avoid situations where Darren might have access to me outside structured classroom environments. My circle of friends diminished, as some peers distanced themselves, fearing association might redirect Darren's attention their way. My grades suffered particularly during junior year when the harassment reached its peak. My mother noticed these changes, expressing concern about my withdrawal and academic struggles. She even suggested therapy, which I reluctantly attended for several months. During these sessions, I discussed Darren, extensively unaware that my therapist's insights about considering the bully's home life and potential problems carried unintended irony, given what I would later discover. By senior year, Darren's focus had partially shifted to college applications and graduation preparations, providing some relief. Though the bullying never completely stopped, its intensity decreased enough that I could focus on my own future. I secured admission to a state university 300 miles away, a distance I specifically chose to ensure separation from my hometown and the memories it contained. Throughout college, I maintained regular contact with my mother through weekly phone calls and holiday visits. She continued her pharmaceutical sales career, mentioning periodic promotions and expanded territories that required more frequent travel. During my sophomore year of college, she mentioned casually that she had started seeing someone, though she kept details vague, describing him only as a professional in the medical field whom she had met through work. When I expressed interest in meeting him during breaks, she always had reasonable explanations why the timing wouldn't work. His hospital schedule, his children visiting prior commitments that couldn't be changed. Looking back, I should have questioned these consistent obstacles, but I respected her privacy and assumed she would share more when she felt ready. After all, I was building my own independent life, focused on classes, internships, and new friendships, far removed from my high school experiences. After graduation, I accepted a position with a marketing firm in Portland, establishing myself professionally while maintaining regular contact with my mother. She seemed genuinely proud of my accomplishments and continued mentioning her relationship, though still without naming her partner or suggesting a meeting. When I directly asked about the unusual secrecy surrounding her relationship, she explained that he was recently divorced and preferred keeping their relationship private due to complicated family dynamics. This explanation satisfied me temporarily. Our relationship continued normally until last spring, when an unexpected encounter at a regional medical conference changed everything. Attending on behalf of my marketing firm, I never expected to come face to face with the man who had shaped my adolescence through his son's cruelty, or to discover his connection to my mother. The revelation came during the second day of the Pacific Northwest Medical Marketing Conference in Seattle. I was representing my firm at our exhibition booth when I noticed him immediately, Gerald Walker, looking barely aged from my high school memories. He was speaking with a group of physicians near the refreshment area, commanding attention with the same authoritative presence his son had inherited. My initial reaction was physical, a cold wave of anxiety washing through my body, triggering long dormant stress responses. I considered avoiding him entirely, but professional obligations made that impossible in the confined space of the conference center. I steeled myself for a brief, awkward interaction if our paths crossed, assuming he wouldn't recognize or remember me. Later that afternoon, during a networking reception, I was engaged in conversation with a potential client when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Turning, I found myself face to face with Dr. Walker, whose expression showed clear recognition. "You're Catherine's son, aren't you?" he asked, extending his hand. "I thought I recognized you from photos." "I'm Gerald Walker." The casual reference to my mother by her first name, coupled with his mention of seeing my photos, created immediate confusion. Before I could formulate a response, he continued speaking, oblivious to my discomfort. "Your mother mentioned you would be here representing your marketing firm. She's very proud of your work. She was disappointed she couldn't make it this weekend, but we're celebrating our anniversary with a trip to the coast instead." Each word increased my disorientation. Anniversary. My mother had mentioned a work training in San Diego that weekend, not an anniversary celebration. And how would this man, father of my tormentor, know such details about my career? "I'm sorry," I managed finally. "How exactly do you know my mother?" His expression shifted from friendly to confused. "We've been together for 7 years. Catherine didn't mention I would be attending the conference." 7 years. The timeline immediately aligned with my high school suffering. While Darren Walker had been systematically destroying my adolescence, my mother had been dating his father. The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed this information. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, struggling to maintain professional composure. "I need to step outside for a moment." In the relative privacy of an empty hallway, I called my mother immediately. When she answered cheerfully, I cut directly to the question, "Are you dating Gerald Walker?" The extended silence confirmed the truth before she spoke. "How did you find out?" she finally asked, her voice small and defensive. "I just met him at the conference. He seemed to think I knew about your relationship. He mentioned celebrating your 7-year anniversary this weekend." Another pause. "I was planning to tell you after the trip. It just never seemed like the right time before." 7 years, Mom. 7 years while his son made my life hell every single day. Did you know who he was when you started dating him? "Yes," she admitted, "but it was complicated. Gerald and I had a professional relationship first, and when it developed into something more, Darren had already established his behavior toward you. I was afraid knowing would only make things worse." "Worse," I repeated, anger replacing shock. How exactly could it have been worse than what I already experienced? Did Gerald know what his son was doing to me? "He knew there were some problems between you two," she said carefully, "but Darren presented it differently to his father. Gerald tried speaking to him about it several times. This revelation added another layer of betrayal. Not only had my mother hidden her relationship, but she had discussed my bullying with Gerald Walker while continuing to pretend to me that she was merely a sympathetic parent with no connection to the situation. "I'm coming home this weekend," I said firmly. "We need to talk about this in person. This conversation isn't happening over the phone." The 3 days between that call and my return to my hometown were filled with tumultuous emotions and sleepless nights. I canceled my remaining conference obligations, citing a family emergency, and booked an earlier flight home. During those days, my mother called repeatedly, each voicemail more pleading than the last, asking me to understand her perspective before making judgments. I also received an unexpected text message from Gerald Walker. "I realize I created an uncomfortable situation. Your mother has explained that you weren't aware of our relationship. I hope we can speak when you're ready." His message only intensified my anger. The casual acknowledgement of an uncomfortable situation seemed grotesquely inadequate, given the years of suffering his son had inflicted, while our parents carried on a secret relationship. Most disturbing was the gradual realization that countless moments of vulnerability I had shared with my mother about my bullying had potentially become conversations between her and Gerald. Had they discussed me over dinner, had my humiliations and pain become casual topics of conversation between lovers, the thought made me physically ill. By the time my plane landed in Oregon, my shock had crystallized into a determined anger. The mother I had trusted implicitly for 24 years had maintained a relationship with my bully's father for 7 years without ever telling me. Every sympathetic word, every comforting embrace, after a particularly bad day at school, now felt contaminated by deception. I needed answers, and I needed her to understand exactly what her choices had cost me. The confrontation began the moment I arrived at her house. She opened the door with tears, already forming, attempting to embrace me. I stepped past her into the living room, maintaining physical distance that matched the emotional chasm that had formed between us. "Why?" I asked simply once we were seated across from each other. "Why hide this for 7 years?" I was afraid, she began, hands twisting nervously in her lap. "At first, Gerald and I were just colleagues who occasionally worked together when I visited the hospital. When our relationship became personal, Darren had already been difficult with you for months. I worried that if you knew it would make the situation at school even worse. So you chose protecting your relationship over being honest with your son." "That's not fair," she protested weakly. "I was trying to protect you too. Imagine how the other students might have treated you if they knew your mother was dating the father of Darren." "Do not minimize what he was," I interrupted sharply. "Darren was my bully. He made my life miserable every single day for 4 years, and you were sleeping with his father." She flinched at the bluntness, but didn't deny it. "As time passed, it became harder to find the right moment to tell you. When you left for college, you seemed so relieved to be away from Riverdale and everything associated with it. I didn't want to bring those memories back by suddenly introducing Gerald into your life." "Did you ever stand up for me?" I asked. "Did you ever tell Gerald that his son was physically hurting me, stealing from me, humiliating me, in front of the entire school? Or were you too afraid that might damage your relationship?" Her silence and averted eyes answered more clearly than words could have. In that moment, I understood that my mother had made her choice years ago, prioritizing her romantic relationship over her responsibility to protect and advocate for her child. "Gerald did speak to Darren," she eventually offered. "Several times. But Darren always dismissed it as normal teenage conflicts, and Gerald, he was in a difficult position with a son he was already struggling to connect with after the divorce. And I wasn't in a difficult position." My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. I was a child who had already lost one parent, whose remaining parent was apparently more concerned about her boyfriend's comfort than her son's daily suffering. Tears streamed down her face now. "I made mistakes," she admitted. "Terrible mistakes that hurt you. But please try to understand that I never intended harm. I got caught in a situation that became more complicated with each passing year." "Where is Gerald now?" I asked abruptly. "He's giving us space for this conversation. He knows how upset you are. Does Darren know about your relationship?" She nodded slowly. Gerald told him during his senior year of college. He was not supportive initially. They've had a strained relationship since then, though they've been working on it recently. This information brought a bitter laugh. So Darren Walker, who made my adolescence a living nightmare, has spent years being angry at his father for dating my mother. There's some irony there. The conversation continued for hours, circling through the same points repeatedly. My mother alternated between tearful apologies and attempts to justify her choices. I fluctuated between cold anger and profound hurt. By evening, emotional exhaustion had set in for both of us, with little resolution achieved. As I prepared to leave for my hotel, my mother asked the question that had clearly been worrying her throughout our conversation. "Can you ever forgive me?" For this I paused at the door, considering the weight of her question and the complicated tangle of emotions it evoked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Right now, I need time and space to process everything. What happens next depends not just on my forgiveness, but on your willingness to acknowledge the full extent of your betrayal and take responsibility for rebuilding trust, if that's even possible." As I drove to my hotel, a plan began forming in my mind, not for revenge in the destructive sense, but for a long overdue reckoning that would finally allow me to address the unresolved trauma of my past. In the 2 weeks following the confrontation with my mother, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our relationship and bring me the closure I had never received during high school. This wasn't about petty revenge or inflicting pain equal to what I had experienced. Instead, it was about finally standing up for myself, establishing clear boundaries, and ensuring that both my mother and the Walkers understood the consequences of their actions. My first step was contacting Gerald Walker, directly requesting a private meeting without my mother present. Despite his initial reluctance, he agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in a neighboring town, where we were unlikely to encounter mutual acquaintances. Gerald arrived precisely on time, dressed in casual clothes, rather than the professional attire I associated with him. The subtle attempt to appear more approachable did nothing to diminish the surge of complicated emotions. His presence triggered memories of Darren's face, which so closely resembled his father's, and the countless moments of humiliation I had endured. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, his confident surgeon's demeanor, somewhat diminished by obvious discomfort. "I'm not here for pleasantries," I responded, maintaining direct eye contact. "I have questions that deserve honest answers, and then I have something to say that both you and my mother need to hear." He nodded, settling back in his chair, with the resignation of someone preparing for an unpleasant but necessary conversation. "Did you know the extent of what your son was doing to me in high school?" I asked, without preamble. Gerald sighed, rubbing his temple briefly before answering. "Not initially. No." Darren described it as typical teenage rivalry. By the time I realized it was more serious, the pattern was well established. Catherine would mention incidents increasingly concerned, and I would speak to Darren, who would promise to stop, but never did. "And you never thought to intervene more directly, to contact the school as Darren's father, rather than continuing to date the mother of the kid your son was tormenting?" "I did speak with his principal once senior year," Gerald admitted. "But you're right. I should have done more much sooner. My relationship with Darren was strained after the divorce. I was afraid of pushing him further away if I came down too hard. That's not an excuse, just the truth of my thinking at the time." "Where is Darren now?" I asked. "He's in Seattle working for a financial firm. He's married, has a 2-year-old son." Gerald hesitated before adding, "He's not the same person he was in high school." "Most of us aren't," I replied evenly. "That doesn't erase what happened. Does he know we're having this conversation?" "No. We don't discuss Catherine or you much. It's still a sensitive topic between us." I nodded, having expected this answer. "I want to meet with him." Gerald's surprise was evident. "I don't think that's a good idea. The past is the past. Opening old wounds." "The past is only the past when there's been resolution," I interrupted. "For 7 years, my mother lied to me while dating the father of the person who made my adolescence miserable. I never got closure, never got acknowledgement, never even got a sincere apology. So yes, I want to meet with Darren. and I want you and my mother to be present." Gerald started to object again, but something in my expression must have conveyed my determination, because he eventually nodded. "I'll speak with him, but I can't promise he'll agree. Then make it clear that my continued relationship with my mother hinges on this meeting. I'm sure she'll be persuasive enough if her relationship is at stake." This was the first hint of my boundary-setting plan, and Gerald clearly recognized the implied ultimatum. "Are you asking me to choose between my son and Catherine?" "I'm not asking you to choose anything. I'm telling you what I need to move forward, and I'm making it clear that I will no longer participate in the pretense that what happened was minor or should be forgotten without proper acknowledgement." Our conversation concluded shortly after, with Gerald agreeing to arrange the meeting within the next month. As I watched him leave the coffee shop, I felt a surprising sense of calm. For the first time since discovering the secret relationship, I was taking control, rather than merely reacting to revelations. The following day, I met with my mother again, outlining my conditions for rebuilding our relationship. First, complete transparency about her relationship with Gerald going forward. Second, participation in the meeting with Darren. Third, family therapy, to address the broken trust between us. "And if I can't convince Darren to meet with you," she asked clearly, recognizing the difficulty of the task, "then you'll have demonstrated what I already suspect, that your relationship with Gerald matters more than your relationship with me, and I'll make my decisions accordingly." The statement wasn't delivered as a threat, but as a simple fact. Years of therapy during college had helped me understand that setting boundaries wasn't about controlling others' behavior, but about clarifying your own limits and the consequences for violating them. 3 weeks later, somewhat to my surprise, the meeting was arranged. Darren had agreed, according to Gerald, after a lengthy and difficult conversation. We would meet at Gerald's home neutral territory that provided privacy for what would undoubtedly be an emotionally charged encounter. Arriving at the upscale house in the hills overlooking our town, I experienced a moment of doubt. Was I pursuing this for closure, or had my pain calcified into something more vindictive? A brief reflection reassured me my goal wasn't to hurt anyone, but to finally address the unspoken truth that had shaped so much of my life. Darren arrived last, entering the living room where my mother, Gerald, and I waited in uncomfortable silence. He had aged in the expected ways, a slightly receding hairline, the beginning of fine lines around his eyes, but remained recognizable as the person who had dominated my high school nightmares. His confident stride faltered slightly upon seeing me, betraying nervousness beneath his composed expression. "Thanks for coming," Gerald began awkwardly. "I know this isn't easy for anyone." Darren nodded tersely, taking a seat across from me, without making eye contact. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. "I'll start," I said, ignoring his obvious reluctance. "For 4 years you made my life hell. Physical intimidation, stolen property, public humiliation, all while my mother was secretly dating your father. I'm not here for apologies you don't mean or excuses about teenage behavior. I'm here because everyone in this room participated in or enabled a situation that caused lasting damage, and none of you have ever properly acknowledged it." Darren shifted uncomfortably. "Look, kids are awful to each other. I was going through my parents' divorce, taking it out on whoever seemed vulnerable. It wasn't personal. It was extremely personal to me," I countered. "And the fact that you're dismissing it now shows you still don't understand the impact of your actions." My mother interjected, "Honey, I think what Darren means is that his behavior wasn't about you specifically, but about his own problems." Her defense of Darren rather than me triggered a flash of anger. "That's exactly the problem, Mom. You're still prioritizing their comfort over acknowledging my experience." Gerald attempted mediation. "We all made mistakes. Perhaps we should focus on moving forward, rather than assigning blame." "This isn't about blame," I replied firmly. "It's about accountability. For years I believed my mother was my ally while she was hiding a relationship with the father of my tormentor. I believed I was alone in dealing with bullying that the adults around me either couldn't or wouldn't address effectively. I'm not interested in punishment, but I refused to pretend these choices didn't have serious consequences." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, cycling through defensive posturing, reluctant acknowledgments, and occasional moments of genuine insight. Darren eventually admitted that his behavior had been excessive and wrong, though he stopped short of a full apology. My mother acknowledged that her deception had compounded the damage of my bullying experience. Gerald expressed regret for not intervening more effectively with his son. None of it erased the past, but the mere fact of having my experiences validated, after years of minimization, felt surprisingly powerful. By the end of the meeting, boundaries had been established that would shape our relationships moving forward. For my mother, this meant understanding that our relationship would require rebuilding with professional help, and that my trust would not be automatically restored simply because she was family. For Gerald, it meant accepting that his presence in my life would be limited and conditional upon his respect for my boundaries with Darren. For Darren himself, it meant acknowledging that his actions had real consequences that extended beyond our high school years. As the meeting concluded, I delivered the message that constituted my real payback for years of suffering and secrets. I want all of you to understand something. From this point forward, I decide the role each of you plays in my life. Not social obligation, not my mother's relationship status, not awkward family dynamics you created through your choices. My boundaries are non-negotiable, and crossing them will result in my permanent absence from your lives. That's not a threat, it's a promise to myself that I will never again allow any of you to minimize my experiences or prioritize your comfort over my well-being. 6 months have passed since that confrontation, and the changes in my relationships reflect the boundaries I established that day. My mother and I are slowly rebuilding trust through weekly therapy sessions and careful, honest communication. She continues dating Gerald, but with a new transparency about their relationship and respect for my limits regarding when and how we interact as a group. Gerald remains largely on the periphery of my life, present occasionally at carefully planned gatherings, but never assuming familiarity or connection beyond what I've explicitly permitted. Our interactions are civil but distant, which suits me perfectly. As for Darren, that meeting was likely our last. He returned to Seattle the following day, and while he sent a brief email a week later that approached a more genuine apology, I have no interest in developing any kind of relationship with him. Some chapters are better closed permanently. The most significant change, however, has been internal. Setting clear, firm boundaries with my mother and the Walkers catalyzed similar changes in other areas of my life. I've become more assertive, professionally more selective about personal relationships, and more committed to honoring my own experiences rather than minimizing them to accommodate others' comfort. In an unexpected development, I received a message last month from another former classmate who had experienced similar bullying from Darren. Apparently, word of our confrontation had spread through hometown networks. She thanked me for standing up, not just for myself, but indirectly for others who had suffered similarly without ever receiving acknowledgement or closure. This connection led to several others, forming an informal support network of former targets of Darren's behavior. These conversations revealed that his pattern of bullying had been even more extensive than I realized, affecting dozens of students throughout his high school years. Many expressed that hearing about my confrontation had helped them contextualize their own experiences and realize they weren't alone. Some might consider this network of survivors the real payback, damaging Darren's carefully cultivated adult reputation by exposing his past behavior. But that was never my intention. Our connections serve a healing purpose, rather than a punitive one, creating community where isolation once prevailed. The true resolution came not from hurting those who hurt me, but from reclaiming my power to define my own story and determine who deserves a place in my life. My mother's betrayal taught me that even those who claim to love us unconditionally may prioritize their own interests over our well-being. The important lesson wasn't to stop trusting entirely, but to ensure that trust is earned through actions rather than assumed through roles or relationships. My relationship with my mother will never return to what it was before I discovered her deception. The uncomplicated trust of childhood has been replaced by a more cautious, conditional connection that requires ongoing effort from both of us. Some days this loss still brings grief. Other days I recognize that our new relationship, built on hard-earned honesty, may ultimately prove stronger than one founded on unexamined loyalty. As for forgiveness, that remains a complicated, ongoing process rather than a single decision. I've forgiven my mother enough to maintain a relationship with clear boundaries. I've forgiven myself for the years I interpreted Darren's bullying as a reflection of my own worth rather than his character. But complete forgiveness may never come, and I've made peace with that possibility. Some betrayals leave permanent marks even after healing. The most powerful form of payback turned out to be living well on my own terms. My career continues advancing, my friendships are deeper and more authentic than ever, and I recently began dating someone who demonstrates what genuine support looks like. Most importantly, I no longer carry the weight of unaddressed trauma and unexpressed truth that had influenced so many of my decisions and relationships. For anyone experiencing similar betrayal by those meant to protect you, I offer this hard-earned wisdom. Your experiences are valid, regardless of others' attempts to minimize them. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for genuine healing. And sometimes the most powerful response to those who have hurt you isn't seeking revenge, but refusing to allow their choices to determine your worth or limit your future. Have you ever discovered a betrayal by someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it, and what boundaries did you establish afterward? Share your experience in the comments below. Your insight might help someone else currently navigating similar painful discoveries. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more about establishing healthy boundaries after betrayal. Share with someone who might need permission to prioritize their own well-being, even when it means disappointing others. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that reclaiming your power after betrayal isn't about punishing others, but about honoring yourself enough to require truth and respect from those who claim to love you.